Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We're full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to real life with real candid conversations. Today's topic is medical issues that college students face while they're away from home. We're pleased to be joined by Dr. Jill Grimes, author of The Ultimate College Student Health Handbook, your guide to everything from hangovers to homesickness.
Dr. Grimes is a board-certified family physician with a passion for practical, evidence-based advice for students of all ages. After spending over 20 years in private practice in Austin, Texas, Dr. Grimes transitioned to a campus health center. And through her work with college students on a daily basis, she's really come to understand the most common medical issues that college students experience. And this experience has in part contributed to Dr. Grimes writing over 6 books. Dr. Grimes, we're so pleased to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I have to tell you, I devoured your book in a day. And I think we were chatting, Kristina, while we were working on the sound and all this administrative stuff. And I was saying it made me go back to my daughter and say, do you wipe from front to back? Really?
The dreaded UTI problem.
Oh,
Well, what I thought also was so great about the book as I was reading it is, to your point, Susan, the book contained really practical health advice, not just for students, but people of all age. That, just never hurts to brush up on.
Don't puke in a sink.
That is key.
I don't,
Let's hope. But if you have to get sick and you can't make the toilet, go for a waste paper basket, right, Dr. Grimes?
Absolutely. Or here's a thought: as you're making that first aid kit that you're going to put together for your college student to send them off, the doggy poop bags that come in a roll?
Oh,
yes, we all
hello. Easy solution. Put those in the first aid kit. That way, if they're feeling queasy, they've got it by themselves. You can throw up in that, throw it away. This is the kind of practical information I like to dish out because, I was saying that the beginning of each semester, the fall semester, every college campus has a plumbing problem. And people, this is a big part of it.
I can't imagine. It's so interesting because Susan and I were talking and, Susan was reflecting on her gifts that she gives to high school graduates heading off to college or just preparing care packages for good luck, best wishes. And this book is a great guide for the first aid kit and everything else. I'm totally envisioning Susan putting together a really nice, cute gift.
Always buying gifts.
That is right.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to cut to the chase.
All right.
I got to talk to you about a topic. Okay.
Great.
Hard-hitting topic.
I'm starting with the big one. You talk through your book about the use of flavored condoms, even during oral sex. Let's cut to the chase, Dr. Grimes. Kids every day about sex, and we're seeing a rise of Plan B and students not even using condom during intercourse. Do you really think anyone's going to use a flavored barrier protection during oral sex?
Well, that's the hope. And that's why we talk about it. And I'll tell you what, just saying those 2 words together, flavored condoms, I talk to young people all the time. And I will tell you what gets that's something that really gets their attention because what I say when we switch and we kind of do risky business. We talk about drugs, sex, alcohol, whatever.
The fun stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. When I'm talking with them, I'll say, why do you think that there are flavored condoms? Because people say, well, people don't really, why would you use condoms with oral sex? Nobody does that. And then I say, well, why do you think there's flavored condoms? And it's like this little light bulb pops on over their head. And you're like, oh, also, not to be crass, but I have yet to hear about any male that refused oral sex if someone, if asked to wear a condom, to use a condom. It's not a turn ender.
Wow, that's a good tip. No pun intended.
Oh my gosh. Does that mean that?
And this is how we're starting the podcast, ladies.
We're getting into it.
It was a really great practice pointer, though, for us as well, because similar to you, Susan and I speak with college students about their sex lives and really personal, intimate details every day, given the nature of our law practice. And I have to say, this is flavored condoms. I don't recall ever talking about that with a student. And we tried to, in a very non-judgmental way, provide some real world
Right.
life
And-
advice about how to more safely engage in sex and consent and STIs and all of that. So this is certainly something good for us to keep in mind.
Right. And for the listeners, I want to clarify that people are like, but again, why do you want to do that? The reason is that sexually transmitted infections can and are transmitted with oral sex. If someone has a cold sore, fever blister, whatever you want to call it, that is oral herpes. And they may not have gotten it sexually. Most people do not get their oral herpes sexually. Most people get it from sharing a drink or, kissing within a family or whatever. It's, if somebody in your family has cold sores, usually a lot of people in the family have it because it's really, really common. So not a big deal, but let's call it what it is. Oral herpes is oral herpes, right? These cold sores, fever blisters. Whether or not someone has a fever blister today, if they put their mouth on someone else's genitals with no barrier, they can pass that on and give that person genital herpes if that person themselves doesn't already have oral herpes, if that makes sense.
And no sharing of lipsticks.
Right.
No lipsticks.
No sharing of lipsticks. Please don't share mascara. That's equally gross. That has nothing to do with STIs, but you don't want to be sharing bacteria from your mascara. Anyway. So that's why. And honestly, the whole reason I wrote my very first book was called Seductive Delusion: How Everyday People Catch STDs. Because who doesn't want to write a book about STDs, right, people? But point is, the whole reason I started thinking about sharing stories, which was what that book does, with accurate information, is because so many of my patients in my private practice, which was a very well-to-do area, people are well educated, well off, and they were shocked when they came in with what they thought was spider bites, bug bites. Almost everyone thinks it's some kind of bite when they get genital herpes, and it's not actually on their genitals, but it's near it. It's on their upper thigh or on their rear end. And they have no idea what it is, but it's this little cluster of red blisters, and it's genital herpes, and that's what it comes from. So anyway, I've got to find a better way to talk about this subject so that we cannot have this happen. Because let me tell you, you guys know, you take a young person who is confident and excited and pumped about their future, and they suddenly have genital warts or genital herpes, they don't feel good about themselves anymore.
Speaking about self-esteem.
Yeah. So let's take a left turn. May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yes,
and Susan and I write a lot about this topic through our legal work with students who have debilitating depression and anxiety. And it seems a running theme in your book is really advocating for CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And, you write about how it's a really good treatment modality for homesickness, test anxiety, even the dreaded bathroom anxiety. So can you describe for us this tell us more about it?
Yeah, and I just want to interject. Kristina, did you get that article I forwarded to you yesterday from the New York Times?
Yeah.
Did you see that article that hundreds of suicidal teens are now sleeping in emergency rooms every night because there's not enough places for them and facilities? So we really do have to focus on mental health, and we're curious what you can now offer.
All right. So let's talk about cognitive behavioral therapy. So we say CBT, which is not to be confused with CBD.
Very
different. Not CBD oil. We're saying CBT. So cognitive behavioral therapy. And how I describe it is, look, this is because people, you get the immediate eye roll. You say, look, say someone's having terrible anxiety, and say it's test anxiety. And one of the things we talk about is this type of therapy, and you get the eye roll. I'm like, no. This is not lay down on the couch and talk about all your mother's failures. This is short, very goal-directed therapy, sometimes just 1 or 2 sessions. And it's all about identifying errant thinking. So basically, how we react to something is much more about our kind of our gut reaction, if you will, than an intellectual process. So for example, let's talk about flying on a plane. I have fear of flying. A lot of people, 40% of the population has fear of flying. And so I get a bump of turbulence and I go immediately from, it's choppy air waves to, oh my gosh, the plane's going to crash. I'm going to orphan my children. They're never going to get over this. And they're not going to go like, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Like I just go 0 to 180. And that is not logical. And I can tell you it's not logical, but having to stop that process is different. And so there's a lot of things that we can do to stop that process. In the college setting, what we mostly see this with, or the best example, I think, is test anxiety. So somebody bombs a quiz. Now, let me just say, this happens all the time, especially to freshmen. They may have breezed through high school, or maybe that they worked super hard through high school, but now they're in a new setting. They take their first, it's always general chemistry, Gen Chem. The pre-meds who are so intent and terrified of making a B, and they don't even make a B, maybe they make a C. And now they're terrified. And that was a quiz, but they go from, oh my gosh, I'm going to flunk the test. I'm going to flunk the course. I'm going to lose my scholarship. I will never get into medical school and, substitute grad school, law school, whatever course. But this kind of thinking, it's catastrophic thinking. And so one of the things that CBT does a really good job of doing, it's identifying catastrophic thinking for what it is and stopping it. And instead putting other things in your brain like, well, okay, in my high school calculus class, you know what, I made a B on a test, on a quiz in that, and I survived that and I got through it. And so like thinking through concrete examples that prove you are getting into a catastrophic thinking rather than something that's accurate.
Helps with the reframe. Reframe your thoughts before you go over the edge.
Well, I love that, Dr. Grimes, but every day we hear from college students saying they can't get into our campus health center. I mean, it's hard enough to get any appointment, much less someone who has the training in CBT. What are we going to do about this on campus?
So there's several things. One, I will say there is a huge movement within college campuses. Everyone recognizes that this is a huge problem. They are trying to funnel more money into mental health. But right now, football, mental health, where do you think the money's going, right? And football generates money for colleges. I'm not picking up football. I love football. But I'm just saying we as a nation have to be prioritizing it more. But on a practical moment for an individual who is in college and can't get in, there's a couple things. One, they should be able to get in to see their primary care physician either on or off campus. And there are other things that we can do specifically for anxiety. One of the things we can do is we can prescribe a low dose beta blocker, which is actually a blood pressure medicine, but we use it in tiny doses, not to lower the person's blood pressure, but to actually slow their heart rate down. Because it turns out, just like our brains feed off our body's response of if your heart is racing and your brain starts going, oh my gosh, I'm panicking. The reverse is true. If we are anxious, but our heart rate is staying slow, our brain kind of takes a step back and sort of processes that maybe we're not that anxious. And that's
the beta blocker. Would that be habit forming at all? I mean, a lot of families are very sensitive about, okay, good for parents.
There's no buzz. It's not addictive in any way, shape, or form.
It has no street value. It's not like
no.
Yeah, it's not like a benzodiazepine.
No. It's again not addictive. You don't combine it with other stuff to make it addictive. It's a very boring drug. It just slows your heart rate down. And in the doses that we use, it doesn't even really affect your blood pressure. And I'll tell you what happens. When I prescribe this, I typically will prescribe 10 pills, and I will ask because you don't take it every day. It's not like a blood pressure medicine used as a blood pressure medicine that you have to take every day. This is the as needed. I've got a quiz today. I'm going to give a talk in my history class. I'm giving a presentation and I'm anxious. I have stage fright. Use it then. Okay. So they take it and it slows their heart rate down. And what I had found with so many students, one, they come back and like, I get to be a hero for the day. They're like, you have just changed my entire course of college because now I was able to give this presentation, or I was able to take this test and not blank out. My brain didn't freeze. So one, they love it. Two, they'll use it 2 or 3 times, and then it's a in your backpack kind of thing. They got it. They know if they need it, it's there, and frequently they don't.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's talk about other prescriptions. I mean, Susan, you, particularly with your special education work, deal a lot with students with executive functioning difficulties. And there's always that struggle with medication. I mean,
You know what? Your chapter on test anxiety really sang to me, because the darling of our practice is our special education practice, which is for younger kids, obviously, for IEP plans and 504 plans. And I love that you focused on executive function skills, because I feel like every college should have a mandatory study skill course for all incoming freshmen. And a lot of test anxiety could be reduced with better habits that, while they should have been addressed in high school, not many schools actually have that on the curriculum.
Right.
Do you feel, I'm going to ask you a really controversial question, that if the study skills were better and more nailed in how to approach learning, that we would have a lot less anxiety and the less need for medication?
I absolutely believe that on so many different levels. I have full disclosure. Our older daughter, who I'm extremely proud of, is about to get her doctorate in occupational therapy, focusing on pediatric autism. So,
So we're all in the same space.
we're on the same team. I promise you. Yes, I think it's really important. And, more and more colleges are having that freshman study skills course. I think some of them are a lot more effective than others. Many of them really just are not connecting with the students, and they make fun of them, and they joke about it. Oh my God, did you go to whatever, study skills, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is there's so many skills that, I talk about brain dumps as an example. That a brain dump, for our listeners, is that you sit down to take a test and say it's like a physics test with a whole bunch of formulas, or a history test with a whole lot of dates. And basically, the second that the test begins, you do a brain dump. You write down all those formulas, because usually it's like 5 formulas, right? Or 5 key dates. You write them down on your test, off to the side, and then it's dumped out of your brain. And then you're not spending that part of your brain in a loop in the back of your brain the whole time while you're doing it, thinking, I got to remember this. I got to remember this. So that's a study technique. And there are so many little study tips like that. I wish I could get every college in the United States to give us their top tip, and then we could post those and get those across to people, because students, when they hear that they should go to tutoring, the smart students, it's interesting. The students with the highest grades in most schools across the board all go to tutoring. So hello.
I see that. And
right?
the more highly selective the college, the more they go to tutoring. And back, sometimes they get in academic trouble from going to tutoring and do wrongful collaborating.
Exactly. But I try and get that across to everybody, because there's this perception that only the kids who are struggling need it. And, you're not even on an even playing field, in my opinion, if you're not going to tutoring of some sort. And a lot of times it's just a matter of learning different techniques to study. I have a ton of friends who are professors, and my dad was a professor. So I have interest in this. I always ask them, what's your favorite tip to give incoming freshmen or a new student to your class? And, the first tip, of course, is go meet the professors, go to their office hours, just meet them, say hello. I had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with a professor, and she said, I realized after you asked me that, when students come and meet me, she's like, it's subconscious, but I think I have subconscious bias, and I want to help them more because I know they've come to help me. She's like, I just, she's been a professor for 30 years. It's just like, I never thought about it from that angle. But so one, go to the professor, and go to the review sessions. But also, when you study, get a partner and as you go through the PowerPoint, which is what most professors use now, right? As you're going through that in your study group of 2 or 3 people, take turns asking each other, what do you think Dr. Rushing would ask on the test off this slide? And then ask it, and then have the other one answer. And then, then you've got this back and forth, and it's much more interactive and it's better learning.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Grimes, because I know Susan and we do a lot of work in the field of academic misconduct. So students, for whatever reason, who have been accused of something, perhaps rightly or wrongly, we hear from students sometimes that they have such test anxiety and trouble focusing. Marijuana really helps them.
Oh, that's right. You got it. It's you can't even argue with them, and it's not our job, but we do.
Now, in your book, you explore dependency on marijuana, and I know Susan and I really appreciate that because in our experience, from our talking to college kids on a daily basis, marijuana has been completely, totally normalized. It's like taking a cough drop.
And they don't believe you can get addicted.
That's right.
Yeah.
It seems like perhaps you disagree with that and, you have a different view. What would you say?
Can I get on my little soapbox and give you like 4 points about this?
Yeah, we want marijuana. Right. How about 3? Because people remember things in 3.
Okay. On the addiction side of it, there is conflicting evidence about addiction, but we do know that in the teenage brain, about 1 in 6 will get addicted if they try marijuana. So the problem is for the college student, 5 out of 6 of their friends that they know never got addicted. And that they're right, because 5 out of 6 don't, or maybe 10 out of 10 of their friends didn't, because the odds are still with you that you're not going to get addicted. But let me just say it is. We see students all the time at the end of college, and I saw patients in my private practice who thought they were just going to smoke during college, who really couldn't give it up. So that's one. Number 2, one of the things that I always say, because I like to use humor to get points across, is I say, if you didn't grow it, you don't know what's in it. And I am not encouraging everybody to go out and start their own pot farm. What I mean by that is that if you are buying your pot where it's not in a state where it's not legal, which the state I'm in, it is not legal. So 100% of pot in Texas is being, is illegally being distributed, right? They sell pot by weight. And so there's things added to add weight, which could be like sand or even crushed glass particles. You don't want to be inhaling that into your lungs, obviously. But worse than that is that frequently there's what we call wet weed, which means that they laced it with something else to make it seem stronger because, of course, their incentive is to sell more pot. So they want to have a reputation of having very powerful pot. So they put things
like
in.
Formaldehyde. Sometimes.
That's what.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Formaldehyde, which we use to pickle dead bodies, right? Like think of freshman biology at your frog, but we don't want that going into your brain. But LSD is the other thing, acid. And so if you think you're just smoking marijuana, but you're having a really bad trip, there could be acid in there. The other thing is, so the third, you only gave me 3. So here's my last one, that so many college students will say, I just use it to relax, to calm down my brain, to go to sleep at night, to calm my anxiety. But what we see is that people who are using pot in this manner actually have more anxiety and, they can have increased paranoia. And I will just tell you, college mental health departments hate pot. And this is why they hate it, because it actually makes things worse, not better. In the short term, just like alcohol, pot or alcohol is going to make you a little bit sleepy and relaxed. It doesn't improve your quality of sleep, however, and you need good restorative sleep to help with anxiety, et cetera, et cetera.
It's sort of a cascading effect, it seems.
It is.
And actually, It's interesting that you talked about wet weed, and if you didn't grow it, you don't know what's in it, because Susan and I have spent a lot of time on the topic lately, and we've explored in a prior episode of Real Talk the dangers of fentanyl, and that being in street drugs, pills, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Kristina, just 2 days ago, a really good friend of mine called me, and her son, who's in college in Arizona, had a very, very dear friend at Ohio State.
I don't know if it hit the national news, but at Ohio State University, tragic story about a roommate coming home and others in the house were dead.
Really good, wonderful kids. And our condolences go out to those families now and for families in the future, because this is something that we have to deal with. Well, want to get out of there. And gosh, we could talk to you forever, but we really have to talk about sexual assault because
That's another thing we deal with day in and day out.
we're trying to hit all sex and drugs. We defend both men and women involved in Title IX cases around the country. We have a national practice. And, it's evening out how many women versus how many men that we actually serve as student advisors.
I know that sometimes we see a difference in the treatment of men and women in these cases on college campuses. I want, would you?
Well, I just want to point out we loved your chapter on sexual assault, but it seemed very focused for females and how to prevent it. We'd like to know if you had to write the book again or you want to add today, what would you say to the other half of our country going to college?
Well, there's definitely, it is not gender unique. Both the perpetrator and the victim can be male or female for sure. I will say in my personal clinical experience, still very heavy on female. And I have to go back and read that chapter now because I tried not to have it completely one-sided. I mean, I do have a bias that I see more of that, but I see it both ways. And I have treated, a good number of male victims as well. And
they're growing.
Right.
And seeing more.
Right. And some of their partners are female and some of their partners are male. Definitely. The thing that I would like to emphasize that might be a little, I'm sure it overlaps with what you guys talk about, but is the whole issue of blackout drinking.
Yes.
And consent. So blackout drinking does not mean passing out. Okay. Passing out is being unconscious. Blackout means that you have a memory gap. And that happens when the blood alcohol content rises too quickly. What causes that? Doing shots. Okay. And so when it rises really quickly, it shuts off the message system in your brain, has to do with the hippocampus. But the bottom line, what you need to know is that you're not creating memories. So the next day, your best friend.
You can look normal.
Right. No, for sure.
You could be blacking out, but to everyone else in the room, you look fine.
That's right. You may not have slurred speech even because your blood, it's had to do with how quickly that blood alcohol level is rising. Now, you may have slurred speech in 30 minutes, but you may not when you were giving enthusiastic, ongoing verbal consent, right? But the next day, no matter if someone was with you the whole time and they're reminding you and say, but don't you remember this? Don't you remember that? And trying to prod your memory. Well, guess what? That doesn't work with this because you weren't making memories. So that person is never going to remember giving consent if they gave it. And they're not going to remember they're not going to remember either way. They're going to know, they may have physical evidence that they were physically intimate with somebody, but they don't know if they consented or not. And you can see the problems that creates. Brownout, by the way, or some people say gray out, but in the South, it's more referred to as brownout, is having fuzzy, spotty memory loss. So similar process, but just there were a little bit of breakthrough memories in there. But you cannot tell, I want to re-emphasize exactly what you said. You can't tell by looking if somebody is going to have been blackout drunk and not have memories the next day.
I'm glad to hear you talk about that. And I think it's great for parents out there to hear you discuss that because Susan and I deal with this issue on a regular basis, cases where person was blacked out, there was an issue, was consent properly given, obtained, and it's just, they're challenging cases.
No fast shot. Right?
Nothing good comes from that.
Nothing bad.
Right.
Flavored condoms, no fast shots.
Just, drink beer or wine. It's really hard. You have to be really aggressive with beer. I mean, think back to the 80s beer bong. You guys are too young, but
no, but not
beer bong. I'm just saying, you have to work at it to get too much alcohol too fast from other things. But shots, they're tiny, they're small, people chug them. And then worse, if you're on ADD meds, so you're on a stimulant medication, you don't even feel the first shots that you do, which makes it so much riskier. And that's I firmly believe that's a big part of the culture of blackout drinking, is that there's no feedback from the body telling them what's going on because the shots are coming in too fast. And then if you add in the ADD medication, you've got that further delay. So it's just very risky.
Dr. Grimes, your book is so comprehensive, and it's interesting to read all the chapters and all the topics you cover. And of course, now with the updates, you had to add.
And I just want to add to the readers, we're picking apart to talk about the chapters that we think lend themselves for discussion. There's a lot of great chapters on there about, just headaches and neck aches and how to deal with
sore throats, coughs, you name it.
When to get an x-ray.
Yeah. It's just, for purposes of like fun fodder, didn't focus on those, but parents, it's just a great how-to manual.
That's right. And I mean, the most recent update with COVID, it's just sort of crazy to think about now that you had to add a chapter on COVID and how students need to be mindful and safe of that. Let's fast forward and you have to do another update. The book is widely successful and your publisher came back and said, add more. If you added content today, what would you add now to stay current? Or what's the most pressing new issue that sort of snuck up in your experience dealing with students on campuses?
Great question.
It is a great question. I will tell you that I started off with 100 topics, and it was a matter of they made me cut it down to 50 for the first book. And then my book came out May 2020. So, it was finished being written in just right before COVID.
Wow. Yeah. Timing.
Yeah. It was a bummer, to say the least. But at any rate, so that was a big obvious, like we have to talk about it. I wanted to talk about Zoom fatigue and what, practical things that you could do to help with your eyes and neck pain and all of that stuff, because it just magnified all the computer issues aside from COVID. But anyway, so that was a big obvious that came in. But I'll tell you, I have a list of 50 more topics that I'm, if we do a new edition every few years, which we may do, I've already got stuff going. Seizures, seizures is not in the book, and seizures are actually really common. And you may not have one, but your roommate might have one. And it's, the biggest thing with seizures, just in a nutshell, since I brought it up, is don't stick anything in their mouth. That's old school. We don't put things on them to keep them from biting their tongue. All that does is choke them. You're just trying to create a safe environment for them to finish having their seizures. So if their head is near something that's going to hit and cause a problem, you might stick a pillow to prevent that. But anyway, seizures definitely needs to be in there. We see so much diabetes. The kids who come into college with type 1 diabetes, most of them have pumps. They know more about diabetes than most physicians about their personal diabetes, But I definitely think there needs to be a chapter on that, both for type 1 and type 2 diabetes, because we're just seeing so much of that. Those are the first two that immediately jump to my mind.
Can I have a suggestion too?
Certainly.
I just have to check.
Dr.
Stone. No, not. But I do think there needs to be talking about cutting.
Oh, self-harm.
Self-harm.
That's actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And then mental discussion.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Can it get infected? Why it's not a good coping mechanism? Maybe just a thought. Well,
it's hard. Like that with eating disorders. I mean, that kind of goes to me. Those go hand in hand. The problem, it's such a complex topic that there were some things that I chose not to put in there.
Yeah,
that was one, but it's a good point. Appreciated. The other chapter that really should be in there that's not is something that I talk about all the time. And I talk about it so much, like I didn't think it necessarily needed to be in the book, but for somebody who hasn't heard me talk about how to prepare your kid to navigate the healthcare system before they go to college.
Oh my God.
All of that. I can't tell you the phone calls we get from angry parents.
Yep.
Why won't the school talk to me? There's FERPA releases. There's HIPAA releases. Your child's 18. The doctor, it's not just going to tell you everything going on. Oh, yes.
Well, you know what, Dr. Grimes? I'm going to be 56. Yes, listeners. And I can't navigate the healthcare system anymore. So I think that we just have to maybe put that 3 books from now. But you heard it to those listeners. We Dr. Grimes has given you a little supplement in our podcast, but to all our parent listeners who've had students heading off to college, again, I can't give what a cute gift it would be to put a box with everything in the last chapter that you suggest that kids have in their box. And I wish you could see the box that she's showing us through the screen along with the book. And you're going to have to be a guest again.
I would love to come back. I was thinking we have so much we could talk about.
We could go on and on and on, but Dr. Grimes, thank you for joining us today. And to our listeners, thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode, and leave us a review so that other people can find the content we share here as well. You can also follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community, and we'll see you next time.